Hey guys, this is Aaron from Raven Dark Creations. Today I'm going to talk about the three types of clay, the main types of clay that I use um, for different projects, as well as just to kind of go over a bunch of different tools. A few people, including my nephew ZJ, have asked about that, so I figured it's come up a bunch online, so I figured I'd do just a video, and I hope it helps. So the first clay that I want to talk about is what I do for really, really big pieces. So this is wed clay, which is Walter Elias Disney. It was developed for Disney when they were doing those huge, just massive displays at Disneyland. It's a really fast clay to work with. It takes detail really well as it starts to dry out. It's a water-based clay, so it does dry out. Um, Wonderful for big stuff. So all of my masks are done in this clay. It's my favorite clay to work in because you can make huge changes to a sculpture just super fast. It's really my favorite clay to work in for especially for big stuff. I like the way I like it being dirty. I like how it feels. You know, it gets all over your hands. That's one reason I don't like doing the digital stuff is I love the feel of clay. You know, there's something about it that just appeals to me. So wet clay is wonderful. It is great for mask making. The problem is it will dry out, so you're never going to have anything you can keep from that unless you do a mold and then cast it in something. So a really good clay. Maybe not the best clay for beginners. You know, it's good to do if you're willing to just sculpt and then throw it away afterwards. But it's good stuff, really good stuff. The next clay that I do for medium-sized stuff, and by that I mean anything basically smaller than a quarter scale human or smaller. I like to do in that. Anything bigger than that, and the wet clay is really nice because it's so fast, and that's what I've got in this skillet here. I used to use crock pots for this, and the crock pots are too deep, so by the time it heated all the way through, it was just too much. So this is nice, a nice shallow, like I think it's like a foot, a foot by a foot square. Um, and the reason you heat it is because Monster Clay is heat sensitive, so it's like a clay wax. I think it's got beeswax in it. Um, Chavant is another one that's kind of like that. You'll see that Chavant. I like Monster Clay a bit better because my last step is to use solvents like naphtha and alcohol, and you can use those on Chavant, but they turn into just a gooey mess. So it's not my cup of tea. So I like this stuff. It's reusable. You'll get a piece. You can put it up on display and stuff, but it's never really fully hardened. When it's room temperature, it's pretty hard. I've got this toad dude that I'm working on here. So, if you take a fingernail to it, it's going to scratch it, So it's not something that you can ever have permanently on display unless maybe it was in a glass case or something. But it's meant to be molded. So you take a mold of your piece and, then you can scrape that clay out and reuse it. So the big silicone vampire baby that I did, that whole thing, all that clay just went right back and got melted back down and has become, 10 other pieces. So most beginners, I feel, should start with something like this because you really need to do a lot of sculptures. And the problem, I think, with some of these other clays is you get a finished piece and you don't grow. This stuff is like, I'm going to make the best thing I can and I'm going to melt it down and then start over. So it's kind of a good mindset to get into. It's not. I understand it's not for everybody though. So it really helped me when I started using this. But I started with Sculpey, and what I'd like to talk about next is Cosclay. I'm not sponsored by any of these companies at all. It's just my personal preferences. I sculpted a lot in Super Sculpey and Super Sculpey Firm, and it was fun. I really enjoyed it. Like the first probably 10 or 15 pieces I did were in Super Sculpey and Super Sculpey Firm. Some of the top sculptors in the world, Tom Kubler, the Shiflett brothers, these guys love Super Sculpey. There's nothing wrong with it, except for me, it's not very durable. So when I would ship something I love spikes. So I'd ship something and it'd have spikes, and the spikes would arrive broken, so it was just not good. I switched to some more durable stuff like Avis Epoxy or Magic Sculpt, but I'm allergic to it, so I have to wear gloves, which is not a fun thing. Part of, again, I love feeling the clay. So I would make some horrible monstrosity like this, and half of these spikes would arrive broken. With the Cosclay, I mean, I can take and bend this stuff in half, and it just snaps. It snaps back. So this is a conversion I did of a bookworm piece that I had from before. So the body is resin, and I just put this new face, the horns and the spikes on that. But so all of this is Cosclay. So all of it stays flexible. Wonderful, wonderful material. I use that for all the little spiky, bits on the feet and stuff too. So I'll put links to get that. This is what I recommend for beginners that want pieces they can keep. It has a few drawbacks compared to Monster Clay. You can't rake Cosclay like you can Monster Clay or Wed Clay. So basically you have to work with only adding clay on rather than subtracting by pulling clay off with rakes and and that kind of thing. You can scrape it and cut it with like an X-Acto or that type of thing, but it does not take raking as well. But it does compress, so you can still do some some subtractive stuff with Cosclay. So if you want to get into it and try sculpting, it's fun to keep your first pieces. It's really good to see them like a couple years into the process too. After you've made some stuff, it keeps you humble to remember where you started. I gave away all my early pieces, so I don't have many of those. I've got a couple, but I look back on some pictures and it's humbling. So yeah, Cosclay is great stuff. You bake it, you can paint it with acrylics, and then you've got your finished piece that you can kind of show off to people. Monster Clay is a really, would be my next thing to go with, and then if you want to get big, you go with Wed Clay. So those are my 3 clay types. I can do future videos if you guys have questions on that, but let's get into some basic tools. So your hands should be what you use until you can't use them, basically. Use them until you are getting into refining, the shapes. Like this guy, he's cooled to room temperature with Monster Clay, so I can take and I can add to him and smooth it in, if I wanted to make that form stand out a little bit more. But the rest of it that's already room temperature, I can't smooth that with my fingers. So I've got to either heat it up, or I can take and use something like this lemon, or I think it's a zester or peeler type thing. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's usually used to make little lemon shavings and that type of thing. But what it does is it allows me to rake the form and unify the forms. So I can take and I can run it in different directions, and it knocks that form down from being rough and not the shape that I want into something small. So Wed Clay and Monster Clay, I can do that with Cosclay. If you did that, you just rip the surface up. So you can't really do it for that. But usually what I do is I make something big, I find the shapes that I want, and I start scraping it, whether with my fingers or getting into the tools, and get into raking. So I'm going to keep this short because, again, most beginners, I think, are going to want to start with Cosclay because they can get their finished piece. But these rakes come in all shapes and sizes. This is a pretty big one, and it's basically like guitar string wire, or this is probably a bass or something bigger. And it's got little striations basically that scrape the clay. So you got this this big one that scrapes these huge chunks out. This one you can come and you can refine the surface, and now running it a couple different ways. Now you've got smaller little rake marks in there. You have, and those go all the way down to my favorite one. This is my favorite one. I made this out of some just guitar string, and you can see just this nice small little rake. I kept buying this exact size and I kept breaking them, so I finally was like, this is getting too expensive, because it only came in this like multi-pack, so I was spending $30 every time I wanted this rake. So after I did that a couple times, I'm like, I'm just gonna make the thing. So all I did is I took a little bit of aluminum tubing or brass tubing. I heated the wire, stuck it in there with pliers, bent it to the shape that I wanted, and then just crimped the tube, and it's in there now. So these, if it breaks, it's like 15 cents to make a new one, so it's great. Other rakes can be made out of like hacksaw saw blades. So this one I think is from Ken's Tools, which is an awesome company. I'll put a link for that too. And it's basically a hacksaw blade that they've dulled the teeth down on. So this is another one of my favorites because it does a really nice tight rake pattern. I can get in there with a circular one, for some of these shapes and scrape the forms down. Really just, yeah, they're great to use. And then you have, and like I said, those go all the way from these huge rakes all the way down to these little guys like this to rake the forms down as you get smaller and smaller. Wire loop tools. So this one's nice because it'll smooth. A lot of times I'll use it to smooth surfaces. And it gives me a nice, instead of having all the rake marks, it gives me kind of a smoother texture, which is, sometimes you want that, sometimes you don't. So another one of my early handmade rakes, which is just this one can only be used on wet clay because it's too soft. But those little wire tools, they go down to a really tiny size, all the way down to these guys, which are some of my favorites. I got these in a multi-pack. I think it was like 5 or 6 really, really nice ones. I've only broken one of them actually out of the whole pack, and they were really good. You got some other ones that are more pottery tools that you'll find. These you can find pretty easily. It's a Kemper tool. Kemper makes a lot of the stuff that I'm going to show you tonight. Another type of it's kind of like a wire loop, but it's got an edge to it, so it gives you a smooth finish. So these are great for wet clay monster clay, but not for Cosclay. Another kind of specialized tool that's used to scrape stuff down is this guy. Some sculpts I use this a ton on, and sometimes I don't even pick it up. So let's get into. Oh, I did want to mention this. The turntable is your best friend. It makes it really easy to see the sculpture, all the way around. Even if you're picking something up, a lot of times it's good just to sit back a little bit and look at your sculpture from just new angles, and then a lot of times you can even tilt it. Always be looking at the sculpture all the way around, because a lot of times you'll put something on and you're only looking face on, and you turn sideways and the face is super flat. There's no depth to it. But it looks right, it looks okay from face on, but you turn sideways, and instead of all these neat angles and forms that the human head is made, the skull is made up of, that's all just flat, and your piece won't look right because of that. So get your stuff, turn it sideways, see it from every angle. The profile is actually more important than the face on a lot of times. So when you're looking for reference, especially, I like to have a profile so that I can see it that way. So yeah, get a turntable. I got this on Amazon. It's a 12-inch. I've got huge ones that I use for my mask when I'm doing those, like a big one. And I put the piece on a board, and then I can spin the whole thing. But every piece I work on these days, even the jumbo big, huge monster legs and that kind of stuff, I make it where I can move it, and if I can't do that, if it's too big, I'm really making sure I'm taking pictures from different angles and that type of thing. Looking at it in mirrors helps a lot of people. So there's different tricks you can do, but always be moving your piece around. So this is one of your most useful tools that's often neglected, I think, is having a turntable. So we get all our rakes. Let's get into stuff you can use for cosplay now, because I think that's going to be what a lot of beginners start with. These guys are my favorite. Kemper tools. There's a huge range of shapes and sizes to this end, as well as to they give you a little loop tool. These you'll get a little bit of use out of this end, but what you really want is this. Some of these have, you can see kind of a comparison between those two. This one's really rounded. This one's more shallow, a little sharper. So depending on how you want to lay the clay in and smooth the clay in, you can take that edge, and it's like having a tinier finger basically, and you can take and smooth the clay in, using different edges, that kind of thing, rolling it. you know, pressing detail in. These are a must, and they're super cheap. So definitely pick up some of those. The next thing is an X-Acto knife. If you need to cut any stuff out, you can use that. And then we get into ball stylus tools. Huge range, anything from these tiny little, you know, some of these things are just like, almost like needles, they're so small, all the way up to these jumbo ones that I use. I use these on big sculptures a lot of times when I'm smoothing a big chunk in, or if I'm putting, you know, strange oblong circular type forms in. So I use all of these. Super useful tool from Philippe Farreau, or I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'll put a link up. I use this for lips, for eyebrows. It's got for putting fingernails in. You know, you can do that really quick. You basically just press it, and you press it in and move it around, and you've got a perfect fingernail. But I use this thing a ton. It's a really good shape, and it just feels wonderful. This is another big tool from that same guy. These are really good for putting angles in on larger sculptures. More useful for wet clay than anything else. Calipers of all sorts, you know, to measure, you know, to get accurate measurements for, you know, just the slide calipers to make sure you're keeping stuff. And even this guy, you can see, I've got that center line drawn so that I can tell, you know, where the eyes need to be, how far the mouth goes out, make sure that I've got some symmetry. You've got the big, you know, the big pincher ones as well that are handy. Yeah, so back to the Cosclay tools. Tons of fancy dental tools, spatulas, scrapers, burnishers is one you want to look up. They are tools that have kind of a curve, like kind of like a spoon almost, but a lot of them will come to a point. This is one of my favorites. I don't know. This might be a dental tool, but. Look up burnishers though. Those are wonderful. I think the Shiflett brothers they've got a burnisher that they use, and it's like 80. They say they do like 80% of their sculptures with that one tool, which I believe. And they're usually shaped kind of like this. This is a good example. But you can get those dental packs at pretty much any hobby store. You know, I think Michael's and those types of stores carry those, as well as little stuff. You know, little things like this. This is really good for, I use this a lot for skin texturing and picking little wrinkles out. So I'll make stuff like that, and then you make these X's all over, and then you just kind of go wild with making these squiggly marks in there, and then adding a little bit of clay to make it look, you know, like it's raised in spots. But you can cut lines with it in different shapes and that kind of stuff too. So I use this for the mushrooms a lot of times when I'm doing the gills on the mushrooms. I use this tool a lot. And this is one that comes in those multi-packs. It's just dirt cheap, so definitely pick that up. I just saw this tool and thought it was fun, and I use it a ton. It's got a really neat spatula shape. It's like a burnisher in 2 different sizes. So that one, I use this one a ton, and I don't even know where I bought it. And that's the thing. Always be looking for where, you know, just as you're going around, just if you see a tool that's got the shape that you think would be useful, just get it. You know, if it's cheap especially. And a lot of these things are really inexpensive. I mean, I've got some, like I said, some rakes are super expensive if they're really well made. They'll last you a long time. Some of the stuff you can make, I mean, I don't have any of them around, but I used to, when I first started, I had a couple sizes of knitting needles, and I would use the points and that kind of stuff to just roll in the clay and that kind of thing. This is the kind of idea. This came in some multi-pack that I got, but you know, it's just basically just a good rounded tip, you know, that goes to a fine point. For texture on Cosclay, I would get into the ball tool, small and smaller ball stylus tools, as well as you know, cutting detailing with any of these pointed tools. For the other stuff, you got these fancy, look like little whiskers almost. They're wire, and you use this to create fine wrinkles. You can just drag it across the surface. For wet clay, I use this a ton. Texture stamps. This is a tree bark texture stamp that I made. Then I just stamp this in, and it gives me a nice bark texture. This is one that I did. It's like a silicone putty that you can press on stuff, and I did this on an avocado skin. And I use this thing. I've got like 8 of these. They're awesome in all different shapes and sizes. You can even use like money counting. These little things for bank, money counting type things. It's this little like fingertip protector, and it's got these little round spots, and you can take that and do you can press it in and make pour textures and that type of stuff really easily. And again, most of this stuff's really inexpensive. It's just when you start collecting more and more of these over the years, it adds up. For smoothing Cosclay, I like to do 99% isopropyl alcohol. I think you can use 91, and I don't use much. So I take a whatever brush fits the piece that I'm working on, and I just kind of brush it on there. I let it sit for a second, and then I take the brush and I use it to knock down the edges of the forms, basically, to make them more rounded and more organic and that kind of stuff, because the alcohol dissolves the clay slightly. So you don't want to soak it in it because you'll just have a gummy mess. But you can put a little bit on there, and it'll soften that outer layer and knock it down, especially good for wrinkles. Another trick is to put a little bit of Vaseline on a cooked piece of Cosclay, and then wipe the Vaseline all the way off pretty much. So you just have a tiny bit on there, and then that'll help the second layer stick. I've done this. I had to do this all the time with Super Sculpey. It just would not stick. With Cosclay, the pieces that I've done, it actually stuck to itself really easily. But if you get something that's like sliding around or something like that, a little bit of Vaseline, just a really tiny amount, spread all over the surface that you're adding to, will make it really bond really well. It like kind of dissolves the two together. It's really useful that way. Other texture stamps, I've got stuff for skin, that type of thing. I sculpted this, pressed that putty that I was talking about in, and just made my own texture stamp. So yeah, if you guys have questions on any of this, but get some Cosclay, get a few of these inexpensive tools, some ball stylus tools, and just make some stuff. Make a few pieces and see what you want, and then feel free to ask questions if you guys have questions. The easiest way to reach me is on Instagram or Facebook Messenger. Just ravendarkcreations.com, or Raven Dark Creations, or the website ravendarkcreations.com. And always happy to talk about this stuff and answer questions and that type of thing. So hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you later.